Hello students, how are you doing? Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Ramesh Chandra Devrath from Indian Institute of Tourism and Travel Management, Gwalior. Today, we are going to study the module Visitor Interpretation, Concept, Types of Visitor Interpretation under the paper Tour Guiding Essentials. We bring this course to you as a part of ePathshala initiative by the Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, to make post-graduation education accessible to all. Discussion during the previous module has led to a solid foundation in terms of our understanding to the underlying concepts about WFTGA, TGFI and other organizations, their work and roles with respect to tour guides. In this module, we take up another important discussion on visitor interpretation, concept, types of visitor interpretations. We will straight away begin with the concept of visitor interpretation. In this module, we will also discuss about various essentials of interpretation. As an important discussion, we will also talk about types of visitor interpretation. This will be the last part of our discussion in this module. Visitor interpretations refers to the multitude of ways in which information is communicated to the visitors. The interpretations can be about anything like a heritage site, industrial site, maybe a natural site, recreation site, museum, park or anything that the visitor is visiting with. Students, interpretation is a communication process designed to reveal meanings and relationships of our cultural and natural heritage through involvement with objectives, artifacts, landscapes and sites. It should be stressed that interpretive communication is not simply presenting information, but a specific communication strategy that is used to translate that information for people from the technical language of the expert to the everyday language of the visitor. The positive outcome of a tour guide's interpretation is said to have occurred when the visitor is able to understand the tour guide's interpretation. This will in turn help the listening visitor to express their own view about the concept explained in the interpretation. The qualities of a tour guide interpretation contribute a great deal in triggering the visitor participation in the tour guiding conversation. Encouraging visitor interpretation happens when the interpretation provided by the tour guide has the following attention-grabbing characteristics, like capturing the attention of the visitor by making use of unique, rare and novel concepts in the interpretations. The attention-getting factors should be true. It should not be a cooked up story. The presentation style should not be monotonous. The tour guide should adopt different presentations methods. They can make the interpretation using different types of media in order to engage the multiple senses of the visitor. If the visitor is willing to share pictures or ideas about the interpretation, the tour guide should allow the visitor to express themselves. This will help the tour guide to understand if the visitor has positioned the tour site in their mind in a way the tour guide meant it to be. Visitor interpretations give a clear idea about how the visitor took to the interpretation provided by the tour guide and about how the tourist destination got positioned in the minds of the visitor. The tour guide should provide the interpretation in a way allowing and involving the visitor in an active discussion about what is being interpreted. The visitor should be encouraged to communicate with co-visitors also. There is a close relationship between interpretation and tourism. Interpretation is concerned with providing information to a visitor about the places they are in and encouraging them to appreciate the care for these places. Interpretation is the process of explaining the people the significance of the place or object they have come to see, so that they enjoy their visit more, understand their heritage and environment better, and develop a more caring attitude towards conservation. The visitor should be allowed to communicate their personal perceptions, choices, and experiences that they can probably relate to with the context of interpretation. This will help the visitor to be able to personally connect with the interpretation that is being provided. This is very important for effective destination positioning of the site also. Any interpretation that covers themes like information about danger, threat of survival, sustenance of family groups, maintenance of social groups, response to injustice, concern about the welfare of the others, reactions to injustice, and several other typical themes, when included in the interpretation, can help with the sustaining the interest, understanding, and participation of the visitor in the communication process. Let's talk about the nature of the visitor a bit. It is nice to have visitors who actively participate in the discussion and interpretation about the tourist destination. Tour guides like to deal with visitors who actively listen to the interpretations to further discuss their perceptions and opinions about the place. Audiences who listen to and perceive the information provided by the tour guides are interesting and special participants because they are participating out of their free will in their own time. They are forever interested in looking at something in a new way. They are looking for interesting things to gain inspiration from. They are looking for quality recreation. Now we will talk about principles of interpretation in detail. The information about a destination should be presented in the interpretation in a way to involve the senses of the audience. Visitors are of different types. Each one learn in a different way. The tour guide should provide the interpretation in a way to suit the learning styles of the visitor. Interpretation is more than just presenting a bunch of truthful facts in an interesting way. The interpretation should be spaced in a way to attract the attention of the audience, to eventually involve them to perceive the interpretation in an intended way. When this happens, this is truly the success of interpretation. Interpretation is an art in itself. It should stimulate, it should provoke, it should inspire. The material facts that are used in interpretation process can be historical, architectural, scientific, mythical, or it can be in any teachable form. Interpretation should be like exposure. Interpretation should be relevant, it should be interactive, it should satisfy the curiosity of the visitor. It should create a valid meaning in the minds of the visitor. It should create the desired destination positioning in the minds of the visitors. It should provoke interesting and valid thoughts about the place in the minds of the visitor. Now, let's talk about essentials of interpretations. Interpretation should be focused on participatory interest of the audience. The quality of the interpretation should be appealing to the wholesome interest of the audience. It should be presented in a way that it is fully understandable by the visitor If the visitor is not able to understand the interpretation fully and is able to understand only a part of the information, then it does not lead to a successful interpretation situation. Now we are going to talk about the importance of resource interpretation. We will talk on 7W. The first W is what. Interpretation could be verbal, non-verbal, genuine, fact, etc. The second W is who. Person who give information, probably author, PR, interpreter, reporter, etc. The third W is why. Why we need the information, audience, writing, publication, personal use. The fourth W is when. Date, it could be time, year, etc. The fifth W is what. What types of resources, verbal, non-verbal, genuine, facts, etc. The sixth W is where. Where exact the location of the tragedy or event happened. And the last one is which. Relevant and have evidence regarding to history, law, facts, etc. The quality of message conveyed in interpretation should be thoughtful enough. In some cases, it should trigger a desired action. For instance, if the visitor did not know how to deal with the locals, the tour guide can provide an interpretation about the local cultural values and other aspects of the local community, which in turn can provide the visitor with the required knowledge and understanding to modify their behavior in a way that is acceptable to the local audience. If the visitor were throwing away plastic bottles and other waste in the tourist destination, the tour guide can educate the tourist about how it is not acceptable to be littering the place. This in turn will help the visitor carry their waste back with them from the trekking site. There are other essentials interpretations like do not pluck the flower, do not take a photograph, and many more. For as much as possible, the interpretation should be provided in a way to cover up the understanding of the visitor with different learning styles. Some educative interpretations that will require an immediate behavior change from the visitor can make a few visitors feel offended. The tour guide should convey the interpretation in a way to avoid the visitor from taking the interpretation in the wrong sense. They need to convey the message tactfully, thereby avoiding the visitor from feeling personally offended. Let us have a look at the types of interpretation now. Quality interpretation will help with increasing the number of visits. Good interpretations can create memorable and rewarding experiences for the visitors or the tourist. The types of interpretation that is provided to the visitor should help the tourist understand the tourist destination in the right light. This is regardless of whether the information is a positive or negative information about the tourist destination. Interpretation happen in different situations, like interpretation on a guided tour, interpretation on point duty, roving interpretation, interpretation in the form of presentations, interpretations that are demonstrations, living history, interactive interpretations, lecture or talk like interpretations, drama based interpretations. Students, let's talk about the first one, which is interpretation on a guided tour first. This type of interpretations happens where a guide takes a group on a tour and provides the group with the required interpretation. This can range from information about the food, stay, and travel requirements of the client. In a typical guided tour, there are different types of visitors. The amount of time the tour group can dedicate to the visit is taken into consideration, and the tour guide creates a tour itinerary to help the tourist complete the site visits. The guide essentially interprets the tour plan process to the visitor group to ensure that the visitors have a clear idea of the entire tour process. If one or more of the visitors are against the plan agenda, the tour guide will choose to change the agenda slightly to suit their needs. And if required, the tour guide will provide a justification to the plan, and they will choose to convince the tourist to accept the plan of action. The interpretation in a guided tour can be related to instructions and tips about the responsibilities, limitations of the tourist in the tourist destination, and other facts like how to shop, what to look for, and interpretations about the different sites that they are visiting, and so on. The second is interpretation on point duty. When there are large numbers of visitors in a group, the tour guide makes an interpretation at a specific point, thereby providing valid and clue-filled interpretation to help the different types of tourists make the right sense out of the tourist destination. This kind of interpretation is provided by local guides who are forever posted there in a specific location, or by those guides who will forever guide the tourist to one particular location. For example, guides in reserve sites and in archaeological sites will have special stories and concepts to convey the tourists at specific sites of visits because they belongs from that place. The third one is roving interpretation. This is an interpretation process where the tour guide provides interpretation in a specific point in the tourist destination as and when required. This interpretation is mainly done around events happening in a tourist destination, specifically alongside the events where the visitors gather to view the event. This type of interpretation is particularly helpful when one or more visitors in the group are not able to make sense of a happening in a particular place, while other members have a clear idea about the happening of a few members might need additional explanation to understand the concept being interpreted. For instance, when the visitors are witnessing a reaction to an action, they might not able to make sense out of a specific reaction like anger, laughter, over a request, etc. The reaction needs elaboration with reference to local culture, practices, or trends in the local society or community to help with better understanding for the visitor. The fourth one is interpretation in the form of presentations. The interpretation is done with the visual presentation or audio recording. The guide would be doing the interpretation by standing in one place in a formal manner, or they will move generously as they talk. They will make the use of gadgets like smartphones, televisions, and other kinds of media to make the presentation. Some guides choose to make presentations for standards instructions, tips, and tricks that are to be delivered to the tourist. Presenting a tourist destination in a specific time of the day is also special. Some destinations are interpreted best during the day, and some are best described during the evening or night. This is also true about looking at a place in a specific season. Choosing the time, day of the week, month, date, and season for the interpretation is a kind of skillful interpretation process. Seasons guides do it right. They take the visitors at the right time to the right place at the right season. A slight skill that comes only when the guide is passionate about interpretation. Students, the fifth type of interpretation is interpretations that are demonstrations. Some interpretations are demonstrations of events where the tour guide demonstrates how something is being done. This is done mostly by encouraging the participation of the audience. For instance, the route that one will have to take for the day's site visit is a kind of demonstration. Similarly, elaborating on a first aid practice during a mountain trekking practice is a kind of demonstration. Where to throw the litter, how to carry the bags, where to keep the stick, how to open the door, are all demonstrations and interpretations in a tourist setting. The sixth one is living history. This is an artistic form of interpretation where the tour guide will recreate the events that corresponds to a specific tourist destination. This can include interpreting anything ranging from dress, objects, regional slangs, artifacts, acting and more. Reliving history is the most reliving of the tourist experience that visitors will want to experience. Interpretation is a powerful tool that can help the visitors relive the events of a place in their minds. Visitors who relive the events of the place in their minds leave the tourist destination with long-lasting memories. Now, students, let's discuss about the seventh one, which is interactive interpretations. In case of visitor types where the audience are multilingual, there might be a requirement for someone who can translate the content of the host and guest in an understandable way. If the host speaks a language that the guest does not understand, and if the guest speaks a language that the host does not understand, it becomes necessary to have a translator in between these two. This is known as an interactive interpretation. This also involves the act of elaborating on the meaning of specific terms that the host or guest are not able to understand. It is also about providing elaborate meanings for these terms that the visitors are not able to understand in response to an interrogative interpretations from the visitors. Students, the next one is lecture or talk-like interpretation. In some tourist destinations, it becomes important to give technical or historical explanation for a better understanding of the tourist site. It can be elaborate or small factual lectures about the related architecture, history, stories, or people associated with the site. These types of lectures are enjoyed in situations like an educational tour of the students. Students, last in our list is drama-based interpretation. Tour guides tend to recreate the events of the past to suit the learning styles of the audience. If the audience has a mix of visitors speaking different languages, and if there are children, it becomes easy to convey the message in a perceivable and interesting manner to the audience. If drama or rebuilding of the event of the place is done, drama is a powerful medium where message can be passed across even if the audience is of a different language. Some actions are universals and the meaning is directly interpreted in the same way by all audiences. Drama-based interpretations in tourist destinations have a better reach when compared to other kinds of interpretations. They stand in the memories of the visitors. The kind of interpretation the tour guide will choose to give is solely dependent upon their personal practices, style, and most importantly, the nature of the audience. So students, by now you must have understood the concept and types of visitors interpretation. What the visitors will learn from the interpretation is something that is completely different from what the visitor will already know about the tourist destination. Even if the visitors know everything about the tourist destination or interpretation concept, when they come to the interpretation setting, they learn something new every time they hear an interpretation. The educational outcomes of the interpretive program will differ from one group to another. Education is based on the perceptual values of the visitors. When the interpretation is interesting and well done, it cannot be denied that the visitor will pay additional attention to the explanation. This is an important result that every tour guide needs to achieve when guiding a tour group. Even if the tour guide is going to present something that the tour group already is well aware of, the use of clear information and a neat structure in presenting the information can help grab the attention of the visitors. Attention should be paid to the age group, intention of the visitors, and their socio-cultural background. When it comes to presenting information, it is important to deliver target interpretation in a way to suit the interest of the visitors. If the visitor is not interested in the concept being presented, they might not perceive anything from the interpretation, regardless of how well the presentation has been formatted. Not all tourists and their purpose of visits are alike. When the interpretation is done in a way to suit the interests and motives of the tourist, the visitor will leave the place with positive experiences and understanding of the place. Any tourist who is going to move out with positive experiences is sure to encourage more visitations by spreading the word to their like-minded friends with tour-based interests. Therefore, the quality of the interpretation is important because it is going to reach more minds than just the immediate visitor. In the next session, we will talk about principles of interpretation. Thank you and happy learning.